1. The shipping company I used to work for would do crew changes in the US. The ships were on liner route and would eventually make it back to the United States where crew members would swap out. However, I then got a new job where the ships weren't on liner service, so usually your relief would be flown out to whatever country you were in. It usually ended up being a nightmare with schedule changes, messed up flights, etc. One colleague was severely overdue. The company sent a relief out to take his place so he could get sent home. The company also has a policy that vacancies need to be filled before overdue reliefs. However, they were waiving this for the engineer in question and sending him a relief first, then filling the vacancy later. The relief gets there and the guy does turnover, teaches him all the specifics, etc. The outgoing engineer asks, "When is my flight?" The chief engineer tells him, "Oh, sorry, we're not actually letting you go. We need to wait for the company to send a second relief. Because I used that guy to fill the vacancy, you need to stay here." Needless to say, the third engineer was pissed. I think he had already scheduled a vacation with his family, like Disneyland or something. Anyway, the ship got underway to sea and he was still there. Around 10 AM one day, I went to the officer's lounge to get a cup of coffee and chill for a few minutes. I saw that guy sitting in the lounge in his pajamas watching the news. And the next day, and the next day. Instead of working, he decided to just watch TV and nap all day. He said, "Yeah, my relief is here. As far as I'm concerned, my job is complete. They cannot get me a flight, but they can't make me work." After a few days of this, the chief engineer actually tried to give the third engineer a disciplinary. He called him into his office and berated him. The next day, the company called the chief engineer in the middle of the day, daytime in America, and basically said, "What the fuck are you doing? Let him go now." The disciplinary didn't go through. He got flown off in the next port, and he continued to draw overdue relief pay and salary those days he was not working. I also want to mention that the third assistant engineer was already overdue for relief. I think he was already 2 months over when this occurred, and that this was pre-COVID. So he was already supposed to be home, then he got a name, and was told when your relief shows up, you're being flown back to your home of record. He told his wife and family that he was coming home. But then the chief engineer pulled the rug out from under him at the last minute. Side story. On the same ship, some other crazy shit happened after the pandemic. The steward's utilityman was overdue. His relief showed up on the ship. The relief could barely walk. He needed a hip replacement, I guess, but decided to come out anyway. At the time, you couldn't get a flight out from Singapore, so the off-going SU just stayed on and decided to keep working. 30 days went by, and then 2 weeks after that, he stopped getting a paycheck. The outgoing SU checked why he wasn't getting a paycheck, and get this, he had exhausted his leave. He called the company, and they told him, "You're at home. You went home over 6 weeks ago." They had marked him as on vacation from his original relief date, despite the fact that he was there and working overtime the whole time. The company was charging him vacation days. Then, when those were all spent, stopped paying him and told him he was AWOL. Anyway, the reason why I brought up the guy before who was on crutches, basically, he had hip problems. Within 2 weeks, that guy could essentially no longer walk. We had an abandoned ship and lifeboat drill, and that guy was blocking the whole crew from going up the ladder stairs to the lifeboats. He was expected to be able to don a firefighting ensemble. Anyway, so he had to be medically repatriated to the US. Company policy is that anyone in that sort of condition requires a medical escort to help bring them home. Guess who got to be the escort? The guy who relieved. Another thing that's funny is the lounge is right down the passageway from the chief engineer's office. So he was sitting back, feet kicked up only feet away from where the chief was working. If the chief, captain, or anyone else went to get coffee from the lounge, he had to see him sitting there. So it was very much an in-your-face or power move on the third's part, and it was quite the object of gossip and jokes around the ship. I used to also grab ice cream from there before going to the gym, and I would get a chuckle every time if he was in there for those days. 2. A little background. I work for a government contractor, cleaning up hazardous waste. At this particular job site, the contract is regularly rebid and sometimes awarded to a different company. The union labor force at this site stays the same when this happens due to union contract. Every once in a while, a new company, NC, will come into the picture with big new ideas on how to improve their profits. always at the detriment of the actual workforce. This is one of those times. The work on site requires the vast majority of workers to dress up in personal protective equipment, PPE. For the more contaminated jobs, this requires 2 sets of anti-contamination clothing, long-sleeve coveralls, canvas boot covers, another layer of each of those, rubber boot covers, 2 sets of rubber gloves, sometimes additional chemical or leather gloves to protect the rubber gloves. With all seams, like with the canvas boot covers, meet the overall legs, taped up to avoid any exposed skin. Then there is the respiratory equipment. For the job in question, it required a pressurized air purifying respirator, PAPR, with filters connected to a hood. Think biological suits as seen in some quarantine or post-apocalyptic movies. Workers don or suit up in this PPE and go in for a dive or entry into a contaminated area to complete a progress on a particular job for cleanup. When work is completed or logical pauses in the work occur, like lunch or end of shift, workers then leave the immediate work area and doff or remove gear in stages from outer layer to inner layer down a line to ensure no contamination reaches the area designated to be clean. If this seems like tedious information, so is the actual process. But perhaps the following will illustrate how it comes into play. Enter new company, with great big plans on meeting goals early for higher bonus payouts to management. After observing some job revolutions, they see an immediate opportunity to increase productivity. Hey, we noticed that your crew is taking hour-long lunches. Yeah? Well, your contract states that your lunch is only supposed to be half an hour. Yeah, you see, the reason we do it that way is, whatever you got away with for the old company doesn't matter. The contract says half-hour lunches. Half an hour is all you get. Well, you're the boss. Cue malicious compliance. Normally, a standard long-term job would take place as follows. Morning pre-job brief, check out respiratory equipment, don PPE, enter the contaminated area, work 2 hours or more until lunchtime, doff PPE, exit the area, go to break area, have lunch, then repeat the process for 1 or 2 additional dives before the end of shift. Battery life on the PAPR suit sometimes dictated exiting the contaminated area to replace the battery on respiratory equipment, and repeat the process until the job is complete. The following day, it went as follows. Pre-job brief, respiratory equipment, 20+ minutes for everyone to don PPE, enter the contaminated area, work roughly 15 minutes. Then the lead worker says, "Okay, people, wrap it up." 35 minutes for the crew to doff gear. Then the new company manager says, "Wait, what's going on?" The lead worker stares right into the fuming manager's eyes with a grizzled calm. Break. State law. 15 minutes for the crew to make it to the contract-required designated break area. 15-minute break, rather than 10 per union contract. 15-minute walk back to change trailer to don PPE. Don PPE for 20+ minutes. Enter the contamination area, work 15 minutes. Okay, wrap it up. 35 minutes to exit the area and doff PPE. There was a huge good old boy grin as he passed the manager, who was now shaking his head in disbelief. Lunch. 15 minutes to traverse to the break area. At the break area, new company manager starts to question the lead worker as he sits down to his lunch, and the lead worker holds up a hand to cut him off. I'm on my contractual and labor law required half-hour lunch. Are you approving overtime for no time off for lunch to discuss work and my personal time? Manager walked away with his jaw still hanging open. The day continued with 2 dives after lunch to sandwich the second 15-minute break. All in all, roughly an hour and a half total of productive work transpired that 9-hour shift. At the end of the day, before the mandatory half-hour to shower before the end of shift, the lead worker beckons the manager over. Now, as we tried to convey yesterday, the reason we take hour lunches is because we combine our 15-minute breaks with the lunch break in a mutual agreement with the former company. Workers get a little more time to eat their lunch, and management gets a whole lot more productivity out of the crew. Now, if you would like to continue having the half-hour lunches, you are correct. You are only contractually obliged to provide us a half-hour. But The following day, the strict enforcement of the half-hour lunch was rescinded for the remainder of their contract. 3. My dad was a very interesting man with interesting collections. He was quite wealthy, and he had the money to buy his bizarre oddities. They actually were fun to look at: an authentic suit of armor, old Greek coins from 500 BC, ancient jewelry, etc. He remarried after my sister and I were adults, and we all pretty much hated the woman he married. It was so obvious why she wanted to marry him. It was for his money. My dad was an extremely intelligent businessman, so I never really understood why he married her. I guess I just assumed he was in lust with her. I just never knew for sure. I did ask him one day why he asked her to marry him. He explained he didn't. She asked him. Again, I asked, why did you agree? His answer was that he couldn't think of a reason not to. Okay, Dad, whatever. Consider this. On their wedding day, she was beyond thrilled. Not because she was marrying my dad, but because all 5 of her creepy sons happened to be out of prison at the same time. When he died, the first thing Pat did was to go through all these oddities. She picked out items she knew were of great value and, of course, kept them instead of including them in the estate per the will. It seemed like she was in court constantly over that will, the properties, etc. I lived out of state, and just losing my dad, I wanted no part of the legal battles and drama. I just couldn't. I didn't want to be part of it, so I hired a lawyer and just asked him to handle it and tell me when it was over. I really couldn't cope with all this. I was sick of it. My dad and I were very close, and it took me a long time to get over the loss of my dad. I just didn't deal with it well, and the thought of what she was doing to all his possessions, it was more than I could deal with at the time. He really loved and enjoyed those items. I was living out of state, and about a year after his death I went home to see my sis and some friends. Pat knew I was home, and she was aware I knew how to use eBay. She did not. She called me and asked if I could eBay some items. For real? She wanted me to help her with these tasks? Sure, I guess. I went over to the house more because I wanted to see my childhood home one last time. She was notorious for putting everything in writing. She didn't want to speak to us, so she would write notes instead. She left the box on the front doorstep with a note asking me to sell this box on eBay. In the box were these ancient coins, ancient jewelry, etc. They did appear a bit beat up, and I realized she didn't understand that these items were authentic. They weren't replicas, they weren't fake, they were the real deal. I laughed to myself and thought, no problem, Pat, consider it done. On eBay, they have a bit of a scam place where you can sell mystery boxes. You don't tell what is in the box. It might be rocks or it might be a treasure. She did say to sell the box, and she did say she wanted it done on eBay. So I listed the box. I was honest. I referred to the request of the step skank and said she wanted me to sell the box. There is another offshoot of eBay where they list odd eBay auctions and bizarre items for sale. My auction made that website. What nobody realized is that what was in the box was legit. It was real. It was worth a great deal of money. I ended up selling the box for I think $44 and change. I sent the original box with all the items listed carefully. I had to. I knew she would take me to court over it eventually, so I had to be careful to document everything, and I insured it for several $1,000s. I can't remember the exact number now. USPS has a max insurance. I think I insured it for $10,000, but I could be wrong. That was very likely the true worth. I dutifully sent Pat the check for $44 and change by certified check. Return receipt requested. My stupid sister called her and told her what I had done and what the true worth of it was. Again, just as I knew, we went back to court, and this was in her list of complaints to the judge. I told the judge the truth. I showed him her note. I proved I sent the box, and he actually sided with me as I honestly did not know the exact value of the items. She thought they were fakes. Who was I to disagree? About a week after I sent the box, the guy's father called me. He was very kind and very professional, but was concerned that I scammed his son. He explained that his son was mildly mentally challenged, and I pretty well took the money he had saved for this box of trinkets, and $44 was a lot of money to his son. He explained that he was aware I didn't know about his son, but would I object to refunding his money if he returned the items? I couldn't help but to laugh. I asked him if he still had the original box. He did. I asked him to really look at those items. they were not quite trinkets as he assumed. Then I explained the whole story. Then the dad felt bad that I lost so much money, and he actually offered to return them. Nope, I didn't want them back. It was truly icing on the cake for me. The box went to a guy who really didn't have much, but he does now. I couldn't have planned that ending better had I tried. The universe does work in mysterious ways. 4. My country has a bit of a different school system. There is an education you can follow before college. The closest thing in English is a vocational degree. This story is about my time there. I was between 16 and 19 years old during my time there. This is a long story. Right now, I graduated college. However, I got my vocational degree first. One of the teachers was the school's internship coordinator. She was mostly in charge of visiting students and their internships, giving them feedback and the last assessment about how they did. This also included deciding whether students passed their internship or not. In order to graduate, you need to pass both internships in 2 years. She was the biggest B-word I've ever met in my life. To this day, I don't know why she works at a school, because she treats students like trash. She would tell students very degrading remarks. I've seen her publicly tell students that they already failed, that they wouldn't be able to find an internship, and threatened to kick them out of the school. She also, almost always, bragged about how many degrees and how much experience she had. A 10-minute conversation would feel like an eternity, because it always included her bragging about her accomplishments, followed by how bad you did. Despite all that, I managed to finish school. I got a passing grade for all my classes, finished my first internship, and almost my second one as well. The only thing I needed to do was one final presentation about my last internship. This happened at the company. I was in the company attire, since I was also still doing my final internship days. I did this, and admit that I didn't do so well. The coordinator told me to redo it. However, she judged me by how I looked and lowered my grade because of it. She said that I needed to be in a suit. This was news for me. Nowhere in the guide was it written, and I never heard of anything like it. I was in the company attire just like everyone else there, because I was working there that day. Another teacher heard this later and got really mad at her for grading me on that. However, because I know I didn't do so well anyway, I didn't say anything. Instead, I immediately asked her when my resit was. Every student has a chance to resit every subject twice. I asked her this before she could even leave the room. She told me that she couldn't give me a date yet. I asked her almost daily on when she could plan my resit, but every time she told me to come back another day. One day she had to wait for a meeting, and the other day she has an appointment. This went on for weeks, and I kept going to school, just to ask her about my resit. The end of the school year was almost there. I finished every class, both internships, and already got accepted to the college I applied for. The only thing I needed was this one presentation. Eventually I got the news that I couldn't do my presentation because there isn't enough time left. She told me to come back next school year. I got furious because I asked her almost daily since the very beginning, when could I do my resit? This also meant that I couldn't go to college because I needed to show my degree before the next school year started. However, no matter what I said, the coordinator and the department manager wouldn't budge. So I went to the exam commission and filed a complaint. That same evening, I got an email with the date for my resit. The complaint worked. At this point, my mom got involved because she was livid about how I got treated. Before the resit, we had a meeting about how this resit would go. My mom told the coordinator in front of everyone else that she didn't want her to be present. The coordinator got pale, but that didn't happen. However, because I filed a complaint, someone from the exam commission had to be present. The meeting ended and the date for the resit was set. However, I did remember her comment about how I had to suit up for my presentation and that she unfairly graded me on that. Cue malicious compliance. I suited up and did not hold back. I put on everything. From my tie to the nicest shoes I had at this point, I was in full business attire. I grabbed my laptop, put all my documents in a nice folder and went to school. I even practiced with another teacher beforehand. The look on her face when I showed up in full business attire was priceless. She was shocked. I did my presentation, and mostly because someone from the exam commission was also there, she had no choice but to let me pass. She told my mom that I did amazing and didn't expect that from me. My mom told me straight in her face, "I know, because OP wasn't the problem was you." She got pale as a ghost, said, "Okay," and walked away. She still ended up giving me a C for my so-called amazing performance, but I didn't care. I graduated and went to college. I finished college now as well. After a year, I got out of there. I went back to school to pick up some documents. She didn't see me, but I saw her bragging to the receptionist about her degrees. She even bragged about having a swimming degree. I don't know what she's doing now, but I don't have to deal with her ever again. 5. So I was recently, about 6 months ago, hired by a big company to do IT. During one of the training sessions, we were told to do 10 to 25 tickets a day. The tickets took a maximum of 3 minutes to answer if it was an easy case, as most of us had replies written up that we used over and over. So one day I did 31, another day when I was being lazy, I still did 27. Boss's supervisor was thrilled at me. One of my higher-ups was not. I was clearly making her look bad because, like I said, minimum per day was 10. And she's a skater. So she decided to spend all her free time, she clearly had, combing through my replies to tickets with a fine-tooth comb, tearing apart every word and reply as much as she could. 2 days after I was told my work was great, I was informed that all work had to be submitted to a higher-up and approved before being sent in. I was like, what the fuck? 2 days ago you said all was well. But I just smiled, said no problem, and then was handed a printed-out Excel spreadsheet by pissy, lazy higher-up detailing her shredding work. 3 minutes into reading, I decided to go hunting. None of her responses were bad. All she did was reword things, some of which I didn't even write as I had used replies that my trainer had been using for 5 years. So I had to ask at some point to know how many tickets I do. The boss's boss has sent me a link into her account, where not only could I see what cases I had done, but everyone's cases. That's when I discovered why Lazy Higher-Up hated me. I was putting her at risk of being fired by running circles around her. So since Lazy Worker had been there longer, of course she was listened to. After a heated senior staff meeting, boss's boss took all us newbies aside and said we all had to get our work approved by a higher-up before sending it out. Now, I had shared a lot of my shortcuts with my co-workers, so we were all doing more work than our superiors got done. That must mean we're badly trained, right? Well, let me tell you the stupidity of that instruction. You see, I worked Tier 1, so anything I didn't know, I was already asking people about, as were my co-workers down on Tier 1. But by not letting us submit anything at all, work came to more or less a standstill, with our higher-ups run ragged going back and forth, proofreading all our tickets before we could send them. This meant that they couldn't get any of their own work done until all us temps left for the day, which meant our already painfully slow ticket process was 10 times slower. With us newbies only able to submit 5 to 10 a day, instead of the 20 to 30 we were doing just the day before the new absurd mandate. And the upper levels had no time to do tickets of their own after having to approve all of ours all day, every day. It's really hard to explain how pleasing it was to watch lazy higher-ups running around because, of course, we all asked for her feedback since she clearly didn't agree with her fellow upper-tier people's emails that we had to work with. So she and she alone could truly tell us how to word things, right? After all, I had a printed Excel sheet, page after page after page, of her tearing apart the replies her co-workers at her level had been using, and all our jobs were on the line over this, as we needed to show immediate improvement. This lasted a whopping 3 days before we were all fired. That's right, fired. Because if the managers had to read and approve our responses, clearly we were not cut out for the job. You told us to get them approved, remember? But honestly, I don't care. It was the most entertaining 3 days I ever spent in tech support. I do feel a little bad for lazy workers' co-workers who were also worked to the bone doing our jobs as well as theirs. But since none of them spoke in our defense, clearly, my sympathy for their plight is limited. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, episode 104. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. And before we do anything else, a little shout out to the author of story number 4, that is the one with our finely suited friend getting their vocational degree. Thank you very much. Life on a Rope. Thank you very much for allowing us to use your story. Now, for those who didn't see the community post today, I'm pushing back Glitch Monthly 1 week as I have health issues. I could explain what those health issues are, but you would regret me telling you, so let's just say health issues, okay? Right, what day is today? This is Thursday, right? So I'm hoping next week. If it's not, then, well, I'll do it as soon as I can, I promise. I haven't forgotten about it, I haven't cancelled it. It's just delayed for now. Alright. I'm hoping that I'll be able to just continue working normally just on regular videos. It's just Glitch is too long. Essentially, I can't sit in one place for too long when I'm feeling that way. Right, I'm hoping working normally just with regular videos, so I'll need to get some paranormal stories, that's fine. And with any luck, stream this weekend, but don't hold me to that. We'll play it by ear for now. Okay, and with that, we're going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.